it never seemed like the United States or Japan was going to hammer out a trade deal. Well, here we are, a few days before the deadline, and Japan and the United States have struck a deal. So we now know what the import rate is going to be on Japanese autos. If you guys are excited for this to be over, at least with Japanese cars, because the European Union hasn't struck a deal yet. Things could get also worse from cars coming in from Mexico and Canada. And if you are happy that we have an announcement for Japan and U.S. trade deal, smash the like button, and how it will affect cars. Well, let's get into it. Japan is investing $550 billion in the United States, and improved market access into Japan for American goods include automobiles. I mean, heck, I don't know how you're going to be able to sell big old American vehicles in Japan. Their roads are so small. Their requirements are completely different. Their streets are narrower. All their vehicles are a little bit more narrow than ours here on average. So there's just different guidelines. So it's not like I mean, Chevy has in the past, because I saw a few Chevys over in Japan for specific Japan marketed vehicles, but like, I don't understand how much volume is going to be sent over there. You're going to have exceptions where, you know, people want a Mustang, something with a big V8. I can't imagine the taxes you would pay on something with a V8 over in Japan. But anyways, yeah, there is a Jeep culture over there to an extent. So I guess it's good that they have more access to American vehicles. But we know in Japan, they have so many more models than we have here from Japanese automakers. Their lineups are incredible. There are exceptions where, you know, they don't get in Japan, like the Tundra or the Ridgeline or stuff like that, like the Pilot, for example. But that could change. But they're also going to be importing more rice and agricultural products into Japan from the United States. All right, so the big news here is all Japanese cars imported into the United States from Japan are going to be hit with a 15% tariff. It was 27.5%. This is almost a halving of the tariff rate. It's still substantial, and we'll explain why here in a little bit. The U.S. has agreed not to impose any caps on auto imports. So if you remember the UK deal, the UK auto tariff import deal, I think it's up to 200,000 cars imported, which is almost all of the cars we import from the UK yearly stateside. Up to 200,000 units are hit with a 10% import tariff, and then it goes up after that probably to 25%. All right. But Japan, it's stuck at 15% no matter what. It seems like it won't go lower, it won't go higher. Now, regardless of how many vehicles are brought in. Now, one big question is, what about parts? Because so many Japanese cars are built in the United States with Japanese parts. And if those are hit at 25%, that's no bueno. All right. That's just going to increase the cost of cars made in the United States as well, which obviously this does too, because we import a ton. Mitsubishi's 100% dependent on Japanese imports. You look at Subaru and Mazda, really heavily dependent. Toyota, heavily dependent. Nissan, pretty heavily dependent, but they're more dependent on Mexico, I would say, Nissan, than they are from Japan at this point, for the United States market, that is. Steel and aluminum between the two countries are still at 50% tariffs. But you got to remember, Nippon Steel, I think that's what it is buying out, or at least partnering with U.S. Steel. So Japanese have, I would say, a huge control over the United States steel industry, but most of that steel is going to be made stateside. So if we look at prices of Toyota models, all right, well, the 4Runner is all brought in from Japan. So if we look at like a base SR5, which is the only trim level I recommend, all right, so if we look at a base SR5 4x4, okay, it's $42,770, and we're going to add 15%. That's $6,400. So your 4Runner is going from $42,000 to $49,000. Now, is it as simple as just adding a 15% tax on? And the answer is we don't know yet, because these companies could, and they have to eventually start passing the cost of these tariffs onto the consumer. And they do that by increasing MSRPs. And they might just increase MSRPs across the board. All right. They might just average it out. Okay, we have a lot of vehicles made in the United States from Toyota, the Corolla LE, which I'm reviewing this week, all the Camrys, the Corolla Cross is made here. So about half, I'd probably say about half of Toyota vehicles are made in the United States. A ton are made in Canada, which the tariffs are said to possibly go up with Canada and Mexico. Matt Blunt, who heads the American Automotive Policy Council representing the Detroit Three, which if you look at General Motors and Stellantis, it's not. Stellantis is a hot mess express. I think they just lost over $2 billion. Yeah, $2.7 billion they lost. And Stellantis owns Dodge and Chrysler and Jeep. But anyways, they're a hot mess. And their headquarters, I think, is in the Netherlands. So anyways, so it's not really Detroit 3 anymore. They all bailed on Detroit. They sent all their cars to Mexico, essentially. There is some in Canada, and that's always been a part of it since the beginning, is Canada auto production. But they all sent tons of jobs, Ford included. Now, Ford, luckily for Ford, they have the most U.S. production compared, percentage-wise of their total volume compared to any other automaker. Well, Tesla actually has the most percentage-wise of vehicles built in the United States. 100% of their cars sold here are built here, but Tesla's been getting by not on the profit of their cars, but on the profit of green credits, regulatory credits that other companies have been paying for through the sales of Teslas is to work around like Dodge not being able to meet their fuel economy ratings. And so they pay Tesla a bunch of tax credits so Dodge doesn't get hit with more fines for not meeting their fuel economy. That's no longer going to happen. There aren't going to be any more green credits handed out to Tesla. So back to Matt Blunt. He says that any deal that charges a lower rate for Japanese imports with virtually no U.S. content than the tariff imposed on North American-built vehicles with high U.S. content is a bad deal for U.S. industry and U.S. auto workers. The thing is, it's like the Detroit Three sent so many jobs to Mexico, so many jobs to Canada, especially Mexico, though. Canada's been around making automobiles for the U.S. market for eons, but Mexico, all those jobs, and that's what gutted Detroit is the outsourcing of jobs, outsourcing of production in Mexico. That gutted Detroit. And so calling it the Detroit Three is kind of just like a slap in the face to Americans because the Detroit Three bailed on Americans and built their cars elsewhere. And that does not sit well with the president. And so he's likely to put a 30% tariff on Mexico and a 35% tariff on Canada for their autos. Now, I don't know if that's on autos or if that's just like reciprocal tariffs or whatever you want to call it. But a ton of Nissan, Honda, Toyotas are built in Mexico, built in Canada. And so it'll be cheaper for those manufacturers to build cars in Japan, shipping them across the world, than it would be to build them in Mexico or Canada. I also want to update you guys on Nissan before I let you go. Nissan shutting down this Mexico plant. That was the first plant outside of Japan for Nissan. The Seebach plant, going back 60 years, so in the 1960s, will close in South Central Mexico no later than March 2027. They will also close the Compass joint venture. This is a new plant built in 2017 with Mercedes, for example. They build the QX50 there, QX55. Well, those are going to be at least discontinued from the Aguas Calientes plant there in Mexico. That's done. Two major plants in Mexico for Nissan are gone. Mercedes will halt GLB as well in the first quarter of next year, but the QX50 and 55 end in late 2025. The next ones are supposed to be essentially based off of the next generation Rogue, to my understanding. Nissan, we know, is also closing one of their historic Opama plants in Japan too. They're closing another one in Thailand. They might close in China. I wouldn't be surprised. China is an important market for Nissan, but their sales keep diminishing there. South Africa is going to close a factory for Nissan. So Nissan's closing 7 factories out of their 17 globally in the next couple of years. Absolutely crazy times that we're living in. It's good to see that the Japanese tariffs have been reduced, but it's still substantial. And cars are already too expensive. But if they can somehow bring in maybe some cheap Japanese cars with hit with a 15% tariff, I think we might be okay. If you look at Honda, Honda has like the HRVs built down in Mexico, but if that gets hit with a 30% tariff, it's dead. Same with the Acura ADX. They make the HRV in other places, for example. It's called the ZRV. And where else do they build? They build it in the Saitama plant, the Yuri plant. And if they close the plant in Mexico, I just don't see them doing it because they have to serve Central and South America, and they can do that with this plant if Honda decides not to send any more HRVs from that plant to the United States. All right, we used to get the fit from that plant. We don't anymore. They also make this in China. But yeah, Japan only gets hit with a 15% tariff. And we know that they make the hybrid of it over there. We need the hybrid of this with the 2-liter. That would be fantastic. Toyota, who knows what they would do or what they will do. If 30% tariffs happen on the Tacoma, it's already too expensive on average, the Tacoma, as well as most cars nowadays. But especially the Tacoma went up a lot in price, like the 4Runner. What's Toyota going to do with all 200,000 production capacity Tacomas in Mexico if they're hit with 30% tariffs? Doesn't look good. But I'll see you guys in the comments. What do you think about this tariff at 15%? What do you think about the tariffs potentially for Canada and Mexico over 30%? That's just bonkers. Bonkers is the time we're living in. And we're just kind of getting numb to chaos. So I'll see you guys in the comments. Thank you for watching and have a great day.